We're going to start. So welcome everyone. We're going to be standing throughout this and hoping to make this as interactive as possible. So to begin, we will actively encourage you all, if you have a smartphone with a camera, to please whip that out, because we have some QR codes that we want people to be engaging in as part of one of our activities today. So we're talking about centering reciprocity and mutuality, best practices that we've found for interacting with researchers in a community-based context. And my name is Alyssa Ramírez Stege. I'm a clinical assistant professor in Celtic psychology and the director of our Esperanza bilingual psychological services certificate that we've done in collaboration with Centro Hispano. And I'm going to pass it on to Evelyn Cruz, who's our main MC today.
Holy smokes, let's see if I can live up to this. Hello, everybody. Evelyn Cruz from Centro. I'm the director for program planning and evaluation in Esperanza at Centro. And today I am coming to share with you a little bit about centering reciprocity with my amazing team, Vivien and Alyssa, that you just heard, Natalie, and Dr. Quintana here. So I want to share a little bit about the guidelines that were we put together in support of community partnerships, community academic partnerships. So I'm going to share a little bit, thank you, a little bit of the background about why these, about why these guidelines and how to use the guidelines. And for that, I'll have my amazing support person here, Sarah, that is all techie and was able to do this. I'm not young enough to do the work that she did. So, and then to do the application of the guidelines. So let's see. So I have to write notes. So I'm going to read a little bit in here because my brain isn't working very well this morning or this afternoon. See? So why were the guidelines needed? So I worked at the State Health Department for about 17 years through different state agencies, mainly in public health. It was a very impactful experience for me, especially because I worked with the Minority Health Leadership Council. And this was a diverse group of community leaders from all different minoritized communities around the state of Wisconsin. And I heard from them firsthand about the various difficulties in engaging to do community work as community leaders. When I came to Centro in 2017 as a deputy director, I had a very real experiential encounter with these barriers that these community leaders in public health had told me about. And in conversations were around power imbalances, being researched on, and sometimes knowing what we don't know, how to figure out what we don't know that we don't know, right? And so in these conversations, let's see. One of the reasons why writing these guidelines were so important is because of the need to advance community academic partnership. I call this like a win-win relationship. And in order to do that, I just wanted to tell you that when I met Lori, who I co-wrote these guidelines with in 2019, I already had experienced some difficulties trying to manage opportunities for engaging in partnering with outside organizations. Sometimes the person that came to outreach looked just like me, a person of color. Sometimes it didn't. But one of the things that was really difficult in these encounters was this assumption that if it was good for the community, then Centro was able to or willing to participate. And oftentimes they were not congruent with our funding and our priorities, or they were not, we did not have the capacity, even if we were interested and they were congruent, we didn't always have the capacity to engage and partner. And Well, bottom line, Centro wanted to be able to partner really well. So when Lori and I met and she asked me what could she do for me at Centro, I just told her I really need some guidelines to allow me as a community organization to know how to ask for what I don't know I should be asking in engaging with evaluators, researchers, and others in a way that allows me to really come together as an equal partner with whomever that's going to be a win-win relationship. And so I told Lori about my pet peeves in partnerships, all of the things that I had heard from my 17 years working in state and working to advance health equity and equity in for community-based organizations. So Lori went back and tried to look for these guidelines, or she looked for these guidelines, and she came back about 2 months later, which was so amazing to me because she actually heard what I was saying and wanted to act on it. But she did not find these guidelines. So she came back and said, I couldn't find them. These are my notes about your pet peeves. Can we put them together into a set of guidelines? And this is how the guidelines came to be. There were like an accumulation of a lot of things that I had learned, a lot of things that Lori was able to also include and expand, and also the many other community partners and academic partners that look at these guidelines. Alyssa, how do I go to the guidelines?
So we'll give you all like 30 seconds to, if you have a phone again. This is how you can scan this to download the guidelines. And then Evelyn's going to go through that with you all. Y'all are doing great. See, look at us, so technological now.
I'm not this young that I can do this.
So this is what you should probably find.
If you didn't catch the code, you can Google it.
So,
Community guidelines for engaging researchers, or for engaging with researchers and evaluators. It's through the, and I can put the QR code.
And if you just put Cruz and Bakken, or Bakken.
Got it?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome.
Awesome. So we only have 35 minutes since we started talking, so we don't have that much time. And that is me saying I'll have to go through this very quickly. So here's the initial guidelines. Here's the table of contents, and it has the history, introduction, the actual guiding principles, which are these 4 guiding principles, and we will concentrate on those. Building, maintaining together effectively, acknowledging and reducing power imbalances, engaging in the research process and methods. There's some resources, contributions, and then the appendices have some that we have used in the past that we thought might be helpful. A little bit of information about Lori and myself, and a history and evolution of the guidelines, which I gave you a brief summary of that also. This is what community research, community partnership, community engaged research looks like. And then the idea for the guiding principles is really to support community-based organizations. So it centers community-based organizations, not the researchers. However, we have found that most of the people interested in them have been academics and researchers. The idea is to provide guidance for community organizations like Centro Hispano to be useful and to inspire, as well as to support ongoing development and adaptation and to be valuable. So they have been about 20 people were able to take a look at them, and we were very thankful for them. They are in the acknowledgement section. Again, these are the guiding principles themselves. And then these are the main themes. And we have building and maintaining and sustaining relationships. So I don't want to go through all this again because we don't have a lot of time. So what I would like to do is shift into having your wisdom. So Sara here is going to help us go through the 4 guiding principles. If you would like to go into this activity.
Yeah.
Sara, can I?
Yeah. Let's see if this works. Okay. Let me know. So, we are a community-based organization serving people. We have also discovered that the best ideas come from a lot of people, and we want to involve you in this activity. So the first time I saw Padlet, I thought it was really, really amazing because it's like a blog in which you can post your ideas, and us as organizers of the Padlet can have access to those ideas. So
Do people have it on your thing? Great.
okay, Alyssa was the one that managed all this in the beginning, and now we want to access to your beautiful and creative minds and to know what does these 4 building principles of community-based guidelines mean to you. So either if you have experienced them, or what do you think about them? What do you think about building and maintaining and sustaining relationships in your areas of expertise, in your areas of work? We want your input, and we want to know what you think about that. Also, we would like to know what you think or you're experiencing working together effectively, because we want to know what has worked more to you. Also, we want to know about acknowledging and reducing power imbalances. I know Evelyn is very passionate about it, but we want to know about your experiences, about what you think about that, and also engaging with the research process and methods. And it's really cool because you can also participate with images and with different resources that you may have already in your smartphones.
So we're gonna go one by one, and each of us are gonna present like an example of how that has come up in our work at Esperanza, and then turn it into you all to in the Padlet with this plus to add your own ideas of how you've seen that happen in your own work. So we'll start with the building, maintaining, and sustaining relationships. One thing that we noticed in how to have like actual relationships that center mutuality, reciprocity, and respect with community and university partners was a big shift in how we think about time. And really investing the time that we need to develop some of those relationships. So for example, in Esperanza, one way that we kind of shifted away from this idea of all meetings really needing to be kind of transactional, where we're getting something out of it. One thing that Evelyn and I and the team did very intentionally was to slow down and allow for time to develop those relationships. So even before even thinking about or creating any projects, Evelyn and I in particular as co-directors of Esperanza spent a lot of time just talking about our dreams, our philosophies, why we do the work that we do, where we come from in the work that we're doing. And that practically meant spending weekly meetings of 1.5 hours to 2 hours, just us talking about this, in addition to our weekly hour-long meetings with the whole team. Once we did that for about a year, then we had a solid idea of how are we going to create a bilingual psychological services certificate curriculum that meets the needs of the community, and all the other projects that have continued to develop have developed from that time that we spent really getting to know each other. We also do yearly, now we're doing, this is our second year, yearly team retreats, a whole weekend where the whole team gets together to talk again, have time to just hang out with each other, talk about what our passions are, where we see this work going, and what we want to continue to grow given our own talents and strengths as individual team members and as a collective. So a question for you all that I would love for you all to add to the Padlet. If you think about the work that you're doing or the work you want to be doing in the community or community engaged work, how are you investing time to build and maintain and sustain relationships? So in this example, these weekly meetings have continued for 3 years of our partnership so far, right? That has been the building block, the maintaining block, and the sustaining block of how this can continue to work. Great. So as people add, we'll be able to talk about it together. Okay. So one thing, becoming real friends, making time before the beginning and after the end of a project to develop caring relationships. We're really, I think, inspired by this idea of building communities of care. And we can't do that when we don't actually care for each other, right? And so that's the antithesis maybe of some of the capitalist ways we think about work environments too, where again, it's like turning on its head this transactional nature of relationships to actually caring for each other. Sharing meals together, super important, right? Having time and investment in money, like where are these funds coming from? A lot of our work right now is sustained through the Wisconsin Partnership Program grant that we got. We also look for other grants that can continue to sustain the work. And now we're shifting towards how can we make that part of our actual budgets within Centro Hispano and the UW Madison Counseling Psychology Program so that these are things and activities that continue to be sustained together. Supporting a consistent person or team to contact who is the go-to for community feedback. Great. We're continuing to do that. I think right now it's a group effort, team effort. But yeah, how do we then turn those relationships between ourselves to the actual community that we're serving as well? Great.
Attending events.
Attending events, so important. Getting the invites to Mercadito at Centro Hispano, getting the invites to go do community engaged like presentations or workshops, building that network of care. Great. Anything that was added here? Spending time in the community and being there a lot, just to chat with people. Yeah, that might be part of your job. So one of the things that I intentionally shifted in the second year, once we started coming back into the office, is that Wednesdays, at least half the day, I try to spend it at Centro Hispano, because that allows for that kind of like casual connection so that we can actually continue to build those relationships. All right, great. So I'm going to turn it to who's next? Working together effectively.
Great. So feel free to keep adding ideas as we go on. We wanted to talk about some of our ideas that we've had for working together effectively. And I assume that you all are engaged in community organizations or campus community partnerships. So lots of these things probably are familiar to you already. I've been working with Centro in different roles over several years now. And I feel like often because we know each other, we assume best intentions, but then sometimes things can get lost along the way. So for me, I found it, or for us, I found it really helpful to have an MOU and to write things out. And those are basic things like, what is the community benefit of what we're doing, right? So especially as researchers, I think me talking from experience, I can get very excited about the gap in the literature and responding to systems of oppression and so on, but then breaking it down and thinking about what are the actual outcomes or deliverables is really important too, and discussing different kinds of outcomes beyond academic publications like presentations or a workshop or a tool or public facing blurbs or all those kind of things. So thinking about that and then actually writing it out too. Some other things that come into that is the general approach, making it explicit that whatever you do is co-created and not created by someone for someone, it's created together. Talking about compensation of participants, who gets paid how much for what, What are the roles of all the people that are participating? And then also if the researcher does publish something, what is the process for that, right? So for example, do you have, do you leave, let's say 30 days, 14 days in advance to share what you want to publish before publishing it? What is the process for if the community partners don't agree with something that you want to publish? So really thinking through all of that and spelling it out, and that's what an MOU does, right? And it goes beyond an IRB approval because it's the guidelines that you and the community partner come up with. And it can be there as a reminder for you in the future too. So maybe revisiting it periodically. So I'm curious what other ideas you all have. I've kind of gone through a couple, but I'm sure there's other things that you've done in your work that assure that you work together effectively over time and sustainably.
Just to plug too, the community guidelines has an appendix with an MOU, like a memorandum of understanding example. So if you don't know how to create one or have never done that, you can use that as a resource as well.
Yeah, and we also have a researcher's pledge attached to the community guidelines, and it's out in Esperanza. There's also a researcher's pledge that all collaborating researchers sign and review. So those are some other tools. Clarify preference for communication style and tools. Yeah, I think that one's really important. So having, for example, having a regular check-in meeting can be really helpful if you just have that on the calendar. Or do you prefer email or not? Oftentimes minimizing emails can be helpful and just clarifying things in person, but that depends on you.
One of our community partners relies a lot on WhatsApp. So like being on the platforms that they use to communicate is super important too, instead of emails.
Centering consent of all parties, valuing and trusting everyone's skills and expertise. Yeah, I think that's really important. Really highlighting everyone's expertise too, right? And like paying people for their work is one way, but there's other ways. Maybe co-authorship is one path that you want to take. So discussing those things.
And building each other up, like being vocal when you recognize the skills, mentoring, learning that you're getting from your community partner, to tell them that, because often our community partners, that is part of holding power in a responsible, equitable way too, right? I'm learning so much from you as well.
Establish an equitable distribution of tasks and responsibilities. Okay. I think I'll need a moment to think about how that can look in practice. But if you want to share anything.
Yeah.
Yes, so we were writing something not very long ago, and we were all co-writing this document together. And one of the people we were working with asked if a PDF would be created, and the request came specifically to the two people that were community partners, that were not academic partners. And it struck me as an interesting request, because anybody in the email could have done that, but the request came very specifically to the two community partners in this long list of people. So
so basically being treated like a secretary.
Yes,
by an academic.
So it was a little bit off-putting, to say the least, but it was very interesting. It was one of those where intention and impact probably were not matching, because I don't believe that it was the intent to. Anything else that you wanted to add? So acknowledging and reducing power imbalances. So let's go on to, and Natalie will help us with that one.
So a lot of the practices we've already been talking about do kind of speak to reducing power imbalances. Some ways that I've noticed it as a student on and research is also thinking to actively engage with reflection as I'm working with folks. And so that could look like a positionality statement. And that maybe just covers the acknowledging, but then actively thinking about how like your biases or assumptions might be coming up in certain interactions. I'm trying to challenge myself to maybe like use Spanish more in spaces instead of just like, especially if that is something that we can like in the space just like make more room for. And I feel like that can show up in research practices as well. That feels important too, to be able to name what's happening.
And for example, in the example that we gave before about our community partner being treated like a secretary by an academic partner or potential partner, so we're not partners at the time, and they will not be partners after that interaction. But naming it and me telling Evelyn, do not respond to that. Do not respond to that request. We are not going to do that. And then actually following up with that academic person to tell them that to whoever it is that can be an advocate to like understand some of the power dynamics that are happening so that it doesn't continue to happen.
Yeah, and to that point, I think when we're deciding to like engage with different organizations, I think really wondering about like values and how things are aligned or not. Assertive and creative distribution of resources, time management for sure. Express appreciation to community partners for providing learning moments when they point out power imbalance.
Yes, being like super culturally humble, because sometimes we don't know or notice when power comes into the room. We assume best intentions for ourselves as well. And it's good to also assume that we're consistently in a learning space.
Can I say something about? I think one of the things that is very difficult in this situation is when you, as a person that was impacted in a, microaggression, let's call it that. So when you're the person impacted in a microaggression, not only do you have to like compose yourself from that situation, but then you also, if you value the relationship, then you come back and you express like what was the situation, what happened, and allow for that. And when there is humbleness, it makes it so much easier. So it's not yet another triple injury. And so that piece is like super important because it takes a lot of emotional stamina to go into your community partner who holds, or to your academic partner that holds this different power, and really say, this is how this impacted me, even though it might have not been your intent. And really having to do that on top of being injured is, it'll be yet another issue if you on top of that have to hear, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, which is usually what happens without recognizing like, oh, okay, thank you for letting me know. Just that piece is like super important too, in that maintaining good relationships, acknowledging and reducing those power imbalances.
Yeah, thinking about like who that labor falls on, the emotional labor.
Can I add one more thing? I love this idea of exploiting the university resources for the community's benefit. And it also reminds me of like everyone on our team, everyone doing this work should be equitably and well compensated for that work. So one thing that we have definitely tried to move away, which is really hard within this academic system, is to compensate our students for the work that they're doing and compensate them well. So we pay them $25 an hour for the projects that they're doing. And we try to find fun before we even do a project, we try to find funding so that they are appropriately compensated. That is really going against the models of academia where we often see our undergraduate and graduate students as indentured servants who are just doing all this work for expertise and experience. All right, I'll pass it to Steve.
Thank you. I'm Steve Quintana. I'm in the Department of Counseling Psychology. And so engaging with the research process and methods, it's really valuable to be able to get the community's perspective. And this has been invaluable for it. And so just let me share one anecdote. Is when I had my first publication, I'm a first generation college student, so I showed it with my father. My father was very proud and everything, but he asked me a good question. He said, who really reads these magazines? I don't see them in the dentist's office, in the doctor's office. So ever since then, I've wanted to make sure that even if I don't quite make it into those magazines, that I'm able to explain to the community what the value is and that they can understand it and it has some relevance for that. And a couple of examples that come to mind relative to this project has been very powerful. So one thing that Evelyn shared with us was the community reaction. So many times we cite some of the health disparities and all the maternal maternal challenges that are faced within the community. And she said she was sharing with that community, and from a researcher perspective, this gives us some leverage to sort of try to get some grants, and so kind of have a mixed feeling about that. But she mentioned that when sharing that with the community, they felt that was very heavy and they needed to take a moment or two to really process that. Another example is that one of the instruments that we're trying to work with is Latinx strengths. Part of that is one of the scales is the work ethic. And so, I think we know that Latinx folks are really hardworking. But checking out the community, they said, we're really doing this to support our family. It's not that we necessarily have pride in some of the jobs that we do or the multiple jobs that we do, but we're really trying to make ends meet, and we're willing to put forth the effort to be able to have the family be able to eat and to be able to thrive if they can. So we've now thinking about that concept differently. So if you could maybe give some examples that you've experienced or other perspectives that has been really valuable in terms of hearing how the real world reacts to some of our concepts and the way we do things. So.
Okay. I think we hear a lot about culturally responsive methods, right? But I think that's really important too, to talk to community partners about what methods they already use, maybe, and how you can incorporate those into your research rather than trying to come up with your own, so that whatever you come up with is relevant to them, right? And that goes in terms of language and frameworks, but also what data means or what knowledge is, right? It could be a conversation or an image or a painting or a song. So kind of expanding what we understand as methods and as they.
Also, I'm really incredibly excited and happy that some of the research projects that Esperanza is working on are research projects that as a community partner we wanted. So Dania Soto is one of our students, and she is working on a staff wellness curriculum, which was something that was incredibly important for us as part of a priority for Centro. The strengths assessment that Steve mentioned is also one, because we really want to change narrative about what is being said about the community. We want a narrative that it is more strengths-based. We can't have that if all the tools are needs and what's lacking. So, so some of the information that you're sharing is being open to taking a few moments to explain research process and methods where there may be unfamiliarity and concerns. Another way that you're doing that is being creative about the medium of dissemination, providing spaces for community to refuse research. That's so important too. Making dissemination opportunities, conferences, installations primarily about outcomes for the community partner rather than the researcher, very much. Be willing to change course and be flexible as community priorities change. So I think I was able to read them all. We're pretty close to time. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for connecting to these guidelines. The guidelines, as Alyssa mentioned, has some tools and resources that are part of that. And if you have any questions, concerns, or want to discuss the guidelines in any time in the future, my information is also, I'm at Centro. Lori and I continue to want to see this as an evolving document because we think that there's more wisdom out there than what we have put in place for now. Thank you so much, and thank you, team.